How you doing today?
Doing very well. Great to be here.
We're gonna have a great conversation, and I want to start by taking things pretty far back, all the way to 16 years old. And you talk about this story in your book, and I loved it, where you won the squash championship in Israel. So for you, this seems like a pivotal moment for you where your whole happiness journey begins. So let's go back there and talk about what happened after you won and what happened as time progressed after that.
Yeah, so the reason why that was a pivotal point for me was because I'd been waiting for it for so long. Prior to that point, I'd been unhappy, struggling in my practices and, generally my childhood, I guess. But then always telling myself that when I win the championship, then I'll be happy. When I fulfill my dream, then I'll finally make it and be happy. And I made it, and I was very happy for about 3 4 hours. And then the exact same feeling that I had before returned. The knot in my stomach, the dis-ease that I constantly felt, the unhappiness. It returned, only this time it was worse, because at least before I was living under the illusion that once I make it, then I'll be happy. And I made it. As far as I was concerned, and yet, the unhappiness prevailed. And that's when I realized that it's probably not about the external, that it's mostly about the internal. Uh, it took me a few more years subsequently and a few more painful experiences to fully commit to a different path, a different journey towards a happier life. But that was certainly the beginning of it.
So, as a kid leading up to that point, would you consider yourself average in the realm of happiness or below or average?
Yeah, probably below average. Today having been trained as a psychologist, I can use more accurate terms to describe. So I wasn't clinically depressed, but probably had low grade of depression, anxiety. Um, you know, um, Henry David Thoreau wrote that most men lead lives of quiet desperation. So I think I was not a man yet, but I certainly lived a life of quiet desperation.
So, you mentioned that you had a few instances after that before you finally got on track towards happiness. What did you do when you had that epiphany and you realized, I'm not just not happy, I've won the championship, but I'm actually less happy? Do you dig into certain readings? What do you do to, facilitate learning in that realm?
Yeah, so initially I didn't do much other than reflect on it. I started reading more self-help books, new age books, in the hope that they'll help me find the path. But then the more significant shift in my life came, something like 5 or 6 years later, when I was an undergraduate at Harvard and studied computer science. Was still playing a lot of squash in college, and found myself in my sophomore year doing very well in squash, doing very well academically, doing quite well socially, and yet being very unhappy. And that was the second major event, that very cold Boston morning when I woke up and said, how could it be? I mean, externally, I checked the boxes. I should be happy according to every standard that I learned about, that I read about, and yet I wasn't. And that's when I realized finally that I have to make a significant shift. And that shift for me then came in the form of leaving computer science and moving over to philosophy and psychology as my majors. And that actually has been my path ever since. That was 30 years ago or so.
Was that a challenging decision for you at the time? I mean, you've come from overseas and you're established at Harvard and you think you're on the path, doing what you love and what you're going to be doing, I'm assuming as a career and for your life. Was it hard to switch gears at that time and did you get a lot of support from family and friends?
Um, so it was hard, but it was even harder to remain in the status quo, mean, I just could not see myself going forward, 10 years, 20, 50 years forward and experiencing the same quiet desperation or the same feeling. Um, so the alternative to making this change for me was unfathomable. It was not even an option. So in that respect, it was easy because I knew that I had to bring about that change, and I didn't know exactly where that would lead me, but I just knew that I had to start experimenting with new ways of being. And to help me along, I drew on the wisdom of philosophers and psychologists, alive or dead.
So, growing up, was squash a popular sport in Israel?
Not particularly. I fell in love with squash the first time I picked up a racket. I'd always known that I wanted to be a professional athlete. I mean, at the age of 6, it was basketball, and then at the age of 7, I stopped growing. So that was that fell apart. But I knew that I wanted to do professional sports. I'd always been an athlete, um, and squash just hooked me.
And do you still play to this day?
Mm. So, I said to myself that I'd play if my kids play, or I'd play with my kids, and they are playing basketball and they're dancing and skateboarding. So, so they're not playing, and I'm not. I actually got injured, and that's what got me to give up squash as a professional uh, option. Um, so no, I'm not playing. I do other things. I do yoga, and I dance on TikTok.
Any specific kind of dance or just your own tall style?
Yeah, my own Tal style. I think yes, that's how I need to think about it, because people ask me, what is this dance all about when they see it? It's Tal style. Yes, absolutely.
You're having fun.
Yes, exactly.
So, coming over from Israel to the US, did you initially come over then when you went to college?
Yes. So I did the 3 years in the Israeli military, as every person has to go through that in Israel, and then afterwards came to the U.S. Worked for a few months and came here for college at the age of 22. So I started college later.
And did that bring any happiness to you? The change, the culture shock of coming over to the US. What was that like for you? Or did you miss home and did sadness creep in because of that shift?
Yes to all. So the change was great. I was very excited. I was looking forward to this, and at the same time, I did miss home. And then, as I said earlier, my second year, I did reach a real low, and that's when I said to myself, how is this possible? I'm doing well here. I have friends. I'm doing academically in athletics. I'm with wonderful students and professors, and yet I managed to botch it up in terms of my well-being. And then it became as clear to me as night follows day that it wasn't about the external. It was all about the internal.
Talk more about that when you started to investigate that internal and dive into the depths. What did you realize was catalyzing this sense of not feeling well?
Yeah. So, basically the mental schema, the mental model that I had, and that many people have, and sometimes they have it for their entire lives, is that success leads to happiness. In other words, the path to the good life is through achievement, through the attainment of goals, whether that goal is getting into a good university, or whether it's winning a championship, or whether it's making so much money, or buying this house, or having or having this relationship, or whatever. That it's about the external. And what dawned on me, what became very clear to me, was that this is simply wrong, and not a little wrong, but very wrong. And by that I mean that we live our lives based on this model. We raise our children based on this model, that success will lead to happiness, and it won't. And having this model, or living by that model, just leads to so much misery in our world.
Well, it seems like you had that epiphany at a relatively young age. A lot of people probably don't get there till way later on in life if they ever do. So in a way, you probably would consider yourself lucky to realize that while you're still in college.
Yeah, I do consider myself lucky to have realized it, and in a sense, also lucky that I felt it so deeply, because very often what brings about change is when we just can't stand the status quo anymore, and that's when we have enough courage, or conversely, when it just hurts too much, and then we have to change. And for me, it was getting to that point where it just hurt too much. And then I was extremely lucky to be in a place where I could reach out to people, to resources, where I was encouraged to explore. I still remember um, freshman week. It was when we had all students had a session, a group session with the Bureau of Study Council, and there were psychologists and social workers, and they spoke to us about our upcoming experience, and they encouraged us there to experiment, to explore. So even if you come in with a certain perception of, okay, I'm a computer scientist, which I was, or I'm a philosopher, or I'm pre-med, explore, try things out. And this is the beauty of a liberal arts education, where you can explore.
And you shared that experience about how it took for you hitting that wall to really step back and analyze your life situation and the direction you're going. But what about for somebody who isn't there yet? They're kind of just stuck in the day to day of, a mundane existence, but they haven't hit a wall and they want to make a change without getting to that point. How do they motivate themselves?
Yeah, let me answer a seemingly unrelated question, but which is very much related. The people often ask me, "Okay, Tal, this is 30 years. Are you finally happy?" And my answer to that is that I don't know how to answer this question. Why? Because I don't think there is a point before which we're unhappy, after which we are happy. In other words, it's not a binary 0, 1. It's a continuum. So yes, I can certainly say today that I'm a lot happier than I was 30 years ago. At the same time, I hope to be happier 10 years from now than I am today. It's a lifelong journey, a journey that ends when life ends. Now, to your question, what do you say to a person who's doing okay, but um, and they're not desperate for change? And my answer to that is that we need to ask ourselves the question: how can I become happier? Not happy, not ecstatic, but happier than I am today. Are there things that I can change in my life to become happier? Now, if I'm content and things are just great as they are, by all means, maintain it, sustain it. But if I think that there is a chance, or there is a place for improvement, then why not try things out? Why not experiment? Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography is titled "My Experiments with Truth." It's not titled "My Finding Truth" or "The Ultimate Truth." It's "My Experiments with Truth." And I think this is a great way to think about life in general. Let's experiment. Let's try things out. Let's see if we can become happier. It may work, it may not work. Which is also related to something else that I emphasize when I teach happiness. Look, I talk a lot about research, and there is a lot of research good research being produced. However, no less important than research is me search. And what me search is all about is experimentation, trying things out, seeing if we can raise the bar for ourselves.
So, coming back to your personal story, when you hit a wall for the second time when you're at college, you mentioned switching majors. And I'm just curious, what other experiments did you run at that time personally to help get yourself out of that position?
Yeah, so switching majors was just one part of it. In addition, I started studying meditation and started doing more yoga and attended self-help workshops. Started watching, more. We didn't have YouTube then that it was so accessible, but still I could get my hands on lectures by different self-help gurus and as well as academics. So I explored that world. I studied that world. I read every self-help book that I could put my hands on. All the attempting to become happier, to increase my self-esteem and self-confidence, to become calmer. So I became, when my wife and I got married and we brought together our CD collection. She was amazed, and she still makes fun of me about this today. 20 years later, she says, "I can't believe how many relaxation CDs you have in your collection." So it's classical music for relaxation and Mozart for relaxation and just relaxation. Whatever came out, I procured to help me. So I tried everything. And by the way, I continue to experiment with truth today. So it's not like I feel okay. I've arrived. As I said, it's a journey that ends when life ends.
And what would you say to somebody who's listening to this or watching this right now and they're looking to become happier? They're not happy with where they're at on the continuum right now, and they want to start out maybe with some easier, base hits, things that can get the momentum going because, if they're not in a happy place right now, it might take a lot of motivation even to do the small things. So, let's talk about what some of those small things somebody can do to hopefully catalyze down the line some of the bigger shifts.
Great. So when I talk about happiness, I essentially divide it into five elements. Um, I they are what I've come to call the SPIRE elements of happiness. SPIRE as an acronym. So the S stands for spiritual well-being. Spiritual well-being is about finding a sense of meaning and purpose. It's about being present in the here and now. Physical well-being, that's the P of SPIRE, is about nutrition. It's about exercise. It's about rest and recovery. Intellectual well-being, the I of SPIRE, is about curiosity, about learning. For example, there's research showing that people who ask questions, who are curious, who continuously learn, are not just happier. They're not just more successful. They also live longer. In other words, it's associated with longevity. So that's intellectual well-being. Then there is relational well-being. About number one predictor of happiness is about quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. Um, and it's also about relationship with ourselves. And finally, the E of SPIRE is emotional well-being. And that's about learning to deal with painful emotions as well as cultivating pleasurable emotions like gratitude, like love, like joy. Now, when we look at this model, SPIRE, spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional, within each one of these elements, we can find very simple, accessible, straightforward interventions. Yes, we can spend our entire lives learning it. Yes, when it comes to spiritual well being, I can read Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and I can read the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, and I can certainly delve deeply into Middlemarch by Marianne Evans. However, I can also, at the very fundamental basic level, increase my spiritual well being by starting a meditation practice which, spending 3 minutes a day, closing my eyes, focusing on the breath going in and out. And that in and of itself can shift the needle. Now, the reason why 3 minutes can shift the needle, or sometimes even less, is because what those minutes do is they initiate an upward spiral where I feel better doing it. And as a result of feeling better, I'll also feel better a minute after. So I'll be a little bit nicer to the person I see, who will in turn be a bit nicer to me. And then I'll work a bit better because I'm in a better mood, and doing better work will put me in even better mood, and on in an upward spiral. That's why small changes can and do make a big difference. So that's an example in spiritual well-being. In terms of physical well-being, exercise. Regular physical exercise, 30 minutes 3 times a week, not that much, has the same effect on our psychological well-being as our most powerful psychiatric medication. With my kids, I don't look at the report card. I don't ask them how they were doing in school. If there's a problem, the teacher will call me up. If they want to share something, they'll share it. But otherwise, I don't ask. But I do always ask about their sports, their athletics. Did you exercise? Did you move? Because this is so important, whether it's for children or adults. It's important for healthy development, it's important for coherent thinking, and it's important for psychological well being. So, regular physical exercise, moving, is critical. Then, intellectual well being, learning new things, engaging the things that you're passionate about. And that could be, it could be, that you're passionate about. Sanskrit literature, or it could be that you're passionate about paper mache. It doesn't matter, but learn, ask, be curious. Then relational well-being. Spend quality time with people you care about and who care about you. And quality time means not being together with them while you're on the phone and doing work at the same time. Really be there. Listen, be listened to, support, be supported. And these are magical experiences um, in terms of increasing our happiness levels. So that's relational well being. And finally, an example of emotional well being is embrace painful emotions rather than reject them. There's a paradox at play here, and that is when we reject painful emotions such as sadness or anger or frustration, when we don't allow these emotions to flow through us and we put a block on them, they actually intensify, they grow stronger. Moreover, we become also um, closed to shut off to pleasurable emotions when we reject painful emotions. In other words, feeling love, the antecedent of it is the ability to experience envy. Feeling excitement, the antecedent of that is anxiety. Feeling joy, we also need to feel sadness, two sides of the same coin. And then cultivating pleasurable emotions, and this is a very simple intervention that Oprah taught us initially, and ever since then there's been a lot of research on it, is expressing gratitude, whether it's by keeping a gratitude journal and writing at the end of the day 3 things that you're grateful for, or writing a person a gratitude letter, a letter of appreciation that makes a big difference to the person receiving it, to you writing it, and of course to the relationship. So these are some ways of relatively straightforward, accessible ways of increasing levels of well-being in a deep and lasting way.
Let's come back to relationships because this is an important one, as you stated, and talk about the relationship we have with our significant other in life and how we go about facilitating a healthy relationship. Whether it be somebody who hasn't found that relationship yet or somebody that's in a relationship, what is it we're looking for as a partner to be in that relationship and to provide, a foundation for happiness? And then what are we looking for from our partner?
Yeah. One of the greatest enemies of healthy relationships and of happiness in general is false expectations. If for example, if my expectation, let's look at the individual before we go to the relationship. If my expectation is that if I study the science of happiness and become an expert in it, then I will live happily ever after, experience a constant high. Well, that's false expectation, and I'm bound to be disappointed, frustrated, in fact, unhappy. The foundation of happiness is first and foremost allowing in unhappiness. Because as I mentioned, when we reject painful emotions, these emotions only intensify. So that's on the individual level. On the interpersonal level, When my expectation is that um, we fall in love, we commit to one another, and then we live happily ever after, just like they do in the movies, it seems. That's false expectations, and that is an automatic, an inevitable path to unhappiness in the relationship. Even in the best of relationships, in the greatest love stories, there are difficulties and challenges and hardships. And these challenges and difficulties and hardships are actually potentially a window to growth, to development, to more intimacy, to greater love. And the sooner we can accept that, embrace that fact, the better off we are. And I'll just share some work by the late David Schnarch. David Schnarch was a relationship expert psychologist who whose work, especially, and I'll recommend here his book Passionate Marriage, has transformed many relationships, including my own, for the better. And he talks there about gridlocks. What are gridlocks? Gridlocks are conflicts within a relationship, but it's not like a regular conflict where you fight, you make up, you make love, and then all is well again. Gridlocks are serious, um, deep-rooted conflicts around something that is very important to both partners. Usually, gridlocks revolve around one of four um, topics. One of them can be money. What do we spend it on? How much do we save? Do we save enough? So one is the the money. The second common uh, topic for a gridlock, for this real deep conflict, is children, specifically their education. How do we raise them? Are we too lenient? Are we too harsh? What school do we send them to? What do we get them? What do we not get them? And on and on. So around children. The third is around sex. What kind of sex? How much sex? This is too rough. This is too vanilla. Is it a monogamous relationship? Do we open it? And this could obviously lead to a gridlock. And finally, the fourth um, topic is extended family, or if you want to be even more specific, in-laws. How often do we see them? Do we see them at all? And so on. And when you have a gridlock around one of these four areas, and there may be others, but these are the most common, what happens then is that you're at a crossroad within the relationship. And by the way, it usually happens, the first gridlock usually happens 3 or 4 years after after the relationship has started, meaning after the honeymoon phase is over. And when you have a gridlock, it usually comes with a shocking realization, which is, wow, I can't believe we disagree on something that is so fundamental. Maybe we were not meant to be together as I thought we were. Because if we were meant to be together, we couldn't be in this deep, value-based disagreement. And then there are essentially three options when you get to the gridlock. And the important point here is that gridlock is inevitable. In the best of relationships, it happens. It can happen after 2 years, it can happen after 5, but it happens. And when it happens, there are three choices. One, you leave, you end the relationship. This is why you see such a peak in relationships ending between 4 and 7 years, because that's when they experience their first gridlock and come to the conclusion that they're not meant to be together as they thought they were. So one is leaving the relationship, exit. Second is staying together, but not really being together. Staying together because of conveniences, because you have children, or because of religion, or because of money, or because you don't think there is a better option out there. It doesn't matter, but you stay together, but you're not really together. You drift apart within your relationship. Option number 2. Option number 3 is you battle it out. You have the conflict. It's painful. You go through it. You disagree. And ultimately could be after a month, it could be after 6 months. You emerge on the other side of the storm and you emerge stronger. Your relationship emerges stronger, more intimate, more compassionate, and more passionate as a result of this gridlock. But it takes work and it takes effort. Now, my wife and I, we'd been together for a very long time. In fact, we were, high school sweethearts. And I remember our first gridlock. I must say, shocking. Because how could it be? I thought, she was the love of my life. How could we disagree around something so fundamental? And our first gridlock was around education. How can we see so differently? These are people we love more than anything else in the world. How could she not see what I see? And she thought the same thing about me, of course. And we had a real gridlock, and we were both up in arms. And then I came across Schnarch's book, Passionate Marriage, and just reading that gridlock is inevitable. In other words, reading that there is nothing wrong with us or with our relationship, that it's simply taking its normal, regular course. That was such a relief, and in part at least enabled us to go through that gridlock in painful, because it's always painful, but in a relatively healthy manner. And we've had a few gridlocks since. We've been together for a long time. And yet today it's a lot easier, not easy, but easier to go through them because, we've been there, done that. We know, okay, now we're fighting, now we're disagreeing. That too shall pass, and we'll grow closer, more intimate as a result of it. So, there is something that is very, that leads to a relief in a sense that, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to struggle. It's natural. It's part of the evolution of any relationship.
But knowing about these gridlocks, is that enough? Picturing somebody right now who is in one of these, and you said they can last up to 6 months. Like, for somebody again who's listening or watching, and they're like, okay, let's say finances, we're not, seeing eye to eye with the way we want to save money. To me, it seems like because these are such fundamental, arguments or disagreements, somebody's going to have to compromise. Like
Mm.
how if we're in this gridlock and it is so important to both people, how do we begin to, back away and pull the tentacles back without somebody totally compromising? How
Yeah.
does that work?
Yeah. Look, sometimes there are the gap in terms of values is wide, and sometimes we're just not meant to be together. Sometimes, in most cases, the overwhelming majority of cases, in most gridlocks, not only are they solvable, they are the road to deeper intimacy, a better relationship, and a stronger individual. How does that come about? It comes about because until the gridlock happens, um, during the honeymoon phase, you don't stand on your back feet. You compromise, or you give up, or you say, "Oh, that's so cute," and you move on. But when the gridlock happens, is when you're no longer willing to compromise in that way. You're no longer willing to look the other way, and then you clash. And what happens ultimately is that you come to an agreement that both of you are happy with. And yes, it could be a compromise on one side versus the other. It could be a semi-compromise on both sides, or it could be a third path that is actually better for both. I'll give you again a very specific example from our very first gridlock in terms of education. My wife was a lot more free and easy with the children. Let them roll, let them just do their thing, evolve, grow up naturally, in a sense. And for me, it was much more about boundaries, and they have to study this and do this and eat this. And today, again, we're far from perfect, and we're still evolving and learning every single day about what it means to raise children. But today we've both come a long way in that. I realized that I shouldn't be controlling what my children eat. That was certainly unhealthy and unhelpful in the long term. At the same time, my wife has come in my direction, realizing that yeah, we should be concerned about what they put in their mouths. Certainly we're not feeding them junk food just because they want it all the time. So we have come to a what we think is a healthy middle path. And when I say middle path, it doesn't mean okay, I gave up 50% and she gave up 50%. A path that is somewhere in between the two extremes that we represented, that we think is healthy. And over time, our children also teach us what is the healthy or beneficial or most helpful path. But that is just, this is part of experimenting with truth. And when we realize that we're experimenting with truths together, when we said we're holding on to what we believe, because I do think children need to eat healthy food, and I do think boundaries are important in raising children. So at the same time, I'm experimenting, and my wife is experimenting with new ways of being and with new ways of doing things, of parenting. For example, experiments with truth, not finding truth.
And just to give us a little more context on that example about the boundaries and the kids, how old were the kids at that time?
Well, when we had our first gridlock around kids, our first son, who's now almost 17, was just born. And what kind of food do we let him? How do we feed him? A bit later on, what boundaries do we put on his behavior? I mean, there were many conflicts around that.
My question for you now is because you've explained there's these four major gridlocks, knowing that ahead of time before we get into a gridlock, is there work we can do as a couple in those areas? Like maybe we decide we're going to set this day aside and get into finances and really hash it out and share our thinking and philosophies around that and go into each of those to try and prevent a more serious problem down the line.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I need to think about it some more, which I will. What I think we can do, rather than preparing particularly for each one or any one of these areas, is create a healthy soil where we can flourish. In other words, create certain conditions in place that will help us when we inevitably experience gridlock. Because no matter what preparation we do, no matter how much we know, no matter how many times we read and reread Schnarch's book, gridlocks will find us. They will find the relationship. They'll be there. But the way we can create conditions so that we can deal with them better when they do come is, for example, um, communicate openly. This is a very important part of any relationship, certainly of romantic relationships. So if we communicate from the word go, and talk about things that are important for us, that we care about, um, that's preparing the groundwork for better dealing with gridlocks. Another concept that is absolutely brilliant that David Schnarch introduces is the following. When many relationship experts are asked, what's the most important thing in a relationship, many would say, well, it's validation. It's validating your partner. Unconditional acceptance, is a phrase that's being thrown out a lot. And David Schnarch says that's not true. That yeah, validation is important. It's nice, but he said even more important than validation is the following: it's knowing and being known. Knowing and being known. Because why? Because when you know your partner, when you are known by your partner, that is what intimacy is all about. So if we can, as a couple, learn to open up and and become more and more intimate over time. In other words, stretch a little bit more in terms of opening up about our desires, our fantasies, our fears, our concerns, if we can open up about these things gradually, not all on the first date, because you will not have a second date if you do it, but gradually over time, then when the gridlock strikes, you're already close, you're already much more comfortable opening up, sharing, um, being authentic, being real, and hence getting through it. So this is one of the ways, this is one of the conditions that we can put in place, intimate conversations that can help us deal with any gridlock in any field, any area.
And if this is a totally new concept to a couple, how do they go about beginning that? Because, maybe somebody's listening to this and they're like, that's a good idea. But if this is a foreign concept to both of them, the other partner might be like, what's going on here? This isn't typical of you. Like how do we start to break down those walls in a healthy way?
Gradually, slowly, carefully. Um, you know, um, I'm not for as I said, going on a first date and then basically wearing your heart on your sleeve. Then it should take time. Today my wife knows things about me that she didn't know 20 years ago, and maybe 20 years ago, it will even be more. We'll be more open and more intimate. And that is the wonderful thing about relationships. Just like we can always become happier, we can always become more intimate. Um, and we need to be careful because intimacy is scary. If it wasn't scary, it wouldn't be intimate. So therefore, when we open up, when we take the first step, and we have to take responsibility for it, then we need to take small baby steps. And usually, when we take a small step in the intimacy direction, our partner will reciprocate. We have an innate mechanism that psychologists called, or they studied under equity theory, that we feel obliged to reciprocate when we're given something, whether it's something physical or spiritual, and or something immaterial. And when we show trust, when we give trust by opening up, by being a bit more intimate, by revealing something about ourselves, the our partner would often feel, again, this is natural, the need to open up a little bit as well.
And is this intimacy practice also a good thing outside of romantic relationships with friends,
Mhm.
with family?
Yeah, no, that's uh, I've been thinking about that a lot because I've been thinking about it in the context of my work. So my colleagues at work, how much do I open up with them? When is too much too much? And obviously here, it also it's also about time because you feel more comfortable with your with your employees, people you've been working with, and it becomes much more than just a professional relationship. It also becomes a friendship, and then obviously you can open up more and more. At the same time, I also think that we need to put boundaries. Once again, I don't think that in and this is unfortunately something that's being eroded today or exploited today on reality TV when people share everything and way too much on in a public forum or in posts on social media. I think we need to be a little bit more humble, a little bit more modest, and and keep immodesty to physically or metaphorically the bedroom.
And how do we know where that line is? Does it come back to experimentation again and
Yeah,
just
yeah, exactly. We
getting a
we
feel
we,
for
don't,
it?
we yeah, we don't. There isn't a clear line out there. But yeah, we try out, and sometimes we go overboard too much, and sometimes we do too little, and we can push ourselves a little bit more. And again, if that's one thing. So I told I spoke earlier about reading every self-help book that I could get my hands on, and attending all these workshops and watching those lectures. And very often in these workshops and lectures, you would get the 5 steps, the prescription to become happier, or the exact location, on the XY with the XY graph of where that line is. That doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because everyone is different, because we all have different level of tolerance to different things such as intimacy, because that tolerance changes across our lifespan and across in terms of time within the relationship. So it's a moving target, and just prescribing a specific line or prescribing a specific idea or specific steps, these usually are in and of themselves not enough. They can be good guidelines. They could be a good platform for thinking about it, but they're not unfortunately, I wish they were, would be much easier, but they're not a definitive, precise prescription.
And you talked about really being into the self-help books and the workshops. What did your wife feel about all that at the time? Did she embrace it too and dig into that information, or like were you having conversations between the two of you and feeling that passion together?
Initially, no, not around the same topics. We have numerous common interests, and I think our biggest common interest is we love people, so we love hanging out with friends, with family, and that is what has brought us together and continues to bring us together today. Um, However, over the years, initially she showed no interest in self-help or new age stuff or in positive psychology for that matter. But over the years, she's become more and more interested. And today, and part of it is because I would practice my lectures, on her, and as well as on my my brother and my friends, because I would give it many times. So she didn't really have a choice but to be exposed to this material. And similarly, from her side, my wife is an artist. She was a dancer, and over the years, I've come to love art a lot more, and very much enjoy dance performances. So again, this is part of a relationship where you help each other grow in different directions, as long as the fundamental values, where there is sufficient overlap there. That is, of course, non-negotiable.
And do you find your kids have taken a liking to the work you're doing and are following your footsteps at all?
Um, well, my kids often make fun of me. However, as I see, so they my eldest son and my well, actually all three of them very often imitate me, and they would stamp and they say, "My name is Tal Ben-Shahar, and I teach positive psychology." And then they would give a lecture about gratitude, or which I love, by the way. A, because they're having fun, and B, because these messages are there. So as a family, we do gratitudes. We go around the table. We are very much involved. All of us in sports, and we dance a lot. Um, and and yet I'm very careful, and again, this is so related to the gridlock and where I see it today in terms of education. I'm very careful not to be a professor at home, to be a dad that does TikToks with his daughter, and and shoots balls with his sons. That sounded very stereotypical, but that is what they do.
And is that a lesson you've had to learn the hard way?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know if it's hard, but yes, it wasn't intuitive. If that is your question, initially, I wanted them to understand, what, because I understand nutrition. I wanted them to understand nutrition. I understand the importance um, of determination and motivation and hard work, and I wanted to impart that on them. The 10,000-hour rule. You have to work 10,000 hours if you want to really be a great dancer or a great basketball player. So in a way, I did impose um, my values, or tried to impose, because it wasn't successful. Tried to impose my values on them, and again, this is where I owe it to my wife, of who reminded me, they're not you, and they will excel or thrive or flourish where they want to do it, if they want to do it.
As you're talking here, I can hear the passion and the drive in your voice and through the stories you're sharing. Where does that come from? Do you think that goes back to the squash days being a kid and practicing that to the point of mastery, or was that more genetic, something you got instilled through your parents at a younger age?
Yeah. So, obviously, I've thought about this a lot, and I think it comes from a few places. Some good, some not so good. Or some, I don't know if I should put a value judgment in terms of good or bad, but some pleasant and some unpleasant. Um, so I'll start with the pleasant, and the pleasant was that I've always been curious, and I think that is to a great extent genetic, or my upbringing. Both my father's an engineer, my mother is a microbiologist. Both of them are voracious readers. Both of them are still. I mean, they're in their late 70s, and they are learning constantly. They're taking courses, and just learning for learning's sake. And I've always loved that. Our home, it was always interesting in that respect. Both my parent, both my parents are very good teachers, so they imparted that sense of curiosity. Um, so, and that means I always want to improve. I always want to get better, whether it's at squash, whether it's as a psychologist, whether it's as a teacher, whether it's as a parent, whether it's as a partner. That I feel is inherent. The second strong drive for me, and that is less pleasant, is the strong need that I had to prove myself. The feeling that I wasn't enough. And that knot in my stomach that I described earlier, that I felt while playing squash, I was never enough. I wasn't good enough in squash. The practice wasn't good enough. I didn't. Later on, the paper wasn't good enough. The exam, the lecture. That was always a drive, or the number of books that I sold, that wasn't enough, and that was a drive. And I remember thinking about this when and by the way, I ended up writing my dissertation, my PhD, on this topic, on self-esteem, and specifically self-esteem that is dependent on others, and self-esteem that is independent of others, that is self-generated. And self-esteem that is dependent of others, it's never enough, because no matter how much validation you get, no matter how many books you sell, or how what a successful business you have, or what car you're driving, you'll initially, it will satisfy you, but then you'll go for the next thing. Nothing is enough. And the other form of self-esteem is the independent one, or the interdependent, which is an even higher level, where you're more accepting and more embracing of yourself, of reality, where you're pursuing your passion for the passion's sake, where you are experience a sense of engagement with life, with the world, independent of whether others approve of you or not. Um, and um, and I remember thinking, as I was, writing about it and doing research on it, I remember thinking, what if I get the independent or interdependent self-esteem to such a high level, then I no longer have this need to prove myself, because other people's approval won't matter. Um, and the conclusion I came to is that other people's approval will always matter. We're social animals. The question is merely of degree. Am I obsessed by what other people? Am I obsessed by my ranking of the book on Amazon? Am I obsessed with having giving a lecture and it being applauded and receiving accolades for it? Or is it nice when it happens, and when it doesn't, I say, okay, that hurts. Let me move on now. In other words, how strong is your innate, intrinsic passion versus your extrinsic desire to please? And the question is, if you were able to get rid of that extrinsic desire, would you still work hard? Would you still invest? And the answer is yes, but possibly less. Because when you look at the most successful people, and this is work by Anders uh, Wallstead, who writes about peak performance. The 10,000 hour research is his. Um, he says that um, for every success, it came as a result of passion, for sure, intrinsic passion, and also it comes from extrinsic motivation as well. It's not just, we'd like to think about, the great athlete or the great artist as being so passionate about what they do that they just wake up every morning and can't wait, to get on court, can't wait to get in front of the canvas. That's not the case. Or the writer who just can't wait to get in front of the typewriter. That's not the case. There are many days when you just don't feel like doing what you've been doing for the past 10 years or what you're training for. And that's when extrinsic motivation, that thought of the medal at the end of the road, or the book at the end of the path, or the show at the end of the canvas, that is driving you. So it's both intrinsic and extrinsic that are necessary. Over the years, I think the healthy evolution is towards more intrinsic rather than extrinsic. But it's never all and nothing. It's just a different ratio.
That makes sense. And when it comes to intrinsic, how do we go about facilitating building that up in a healthy way?
Yeah. You know, Let me answer that in very general terms, and then I'll get more specific. To bring about change, the best way is through action. In other words, even if you have to act as if it's already there, in other words, to fake it, do so, and then you make it, or then you become it. So when it comes to passion, the same thing applies. Act as if. In other words, ask yourself, what is my passion? What do I really, really want to do? And then just do it, even if you are pulled towards doing things that you're not passionate about, but that you are doing because other people would approve of them. So, for example, I often talk about it with my younger students. They're 22 years old. They've just graduated from college, and they have paths that open. Two roads open to them, and the question is, which one will they take? Well, one of them is something they're passionate about. The other is they know that they will get more approval and accolades for. And I say to them, you're pulled in both directions. However, if your passion is a viable path, I'm not telling them to go and try something where there is 0.01% chance of success, and the rest is utter and complete failure. I'm not saying take risks if that is not your personality, because some are more risk averse. However, what I'm saying, it's okay to take the more risky path and fake it, even if you're very strongly pulled towards pleasing others and doing what will gain you more accolades. Fake it, and then over time you will learn to be in your discomfort or stretch the zone, and over time that will become more comfortable. So you're faking it until you're becoming it.
Well, it's interesting beyond just the person having to, you talked about instilling that in students, but beyond the person themselves having to direct themselves towards the route of passion, there might be other people in their life, like parents that have certain expectations, or a spouse or a partner. How do we go about making them realize, like, this is a risk I want to take and this is something I'm passionate about?
Yeah, no, that's always a difficult decision, and especially when you have, and there are many cases like this. Parents who say, we've spent our whole lives just to get you to college. We didn't go to college, and now you're going to be a teacher, and now you're going into this not for profit, or now you're going into investment banking when you can be a doctor. It doesn't matter. You can fill in the blanks, and that is very difficult. And making difficult decisions, by definition, is difficult. And what we need to do then is spend time and think about the pros and cons. And we have, as far as we know, one life to live. and you need to make your own decisions with all the implications thereof. And the point is that whether you decide to go left or right, whether you decide to do what it is that your parents are hoping that you'll do, or whether you decide to take your own path. Once you commit to it, be 100% in it. Truly experiment with that truth. And if it doesn't work, then change paths later. It's okay to make mistakes.
It's interesting using the example of my life. I was trained as a chiropractor. I was in practice for a number of years, and I've pivoted over time in an organic way to having this podcast and this being my business and what I do. And I'm lucky enough, I had a lot of support along the way in that transition from family, from my partner. And it's interesting though, I think about this sometimes because, the show, the podcast has gained a lot of momentum and it's quote unquote successful and I'm quote unquote successful. But what if the show hadn't been successful? Like there's the person that's, following their passion and then achieving success and then getting the people in their life to support that decision after they've gotten the success. I don't know if I'm articulating this that well, but it's like you get to a certain point of success along the passion route, and then I don't think it matters as much. The outside influences begin to support you no matter what you do.
But the question is, as you point out, is what happens before that success comes? What happens when you're struggling, and the choir around you may say something to the effect, or hint at saying something to the effect of, "I told you." So what do you do then? And then it's okay. Again, be humble, be modest. It's okay to admit defeat if that is what you feel, truly believe, and it's okay to continue struggling if this is something that you really believe in. Um, Important to know about success, and this is where we started off. It's important to know about success that is not the answer to happiness. Just because you check the boxes, that in and of itself will not make you happy. What will make you happy is if you're doing something that is meaningful, that is important to you. If you're pursuing a path towards a destination that you deem worthy. That is the essence of happiness. And if you're doing it, and even if there are not the accolades or the traditionally um, approved of uh, successes, that's okay. That's okay. It would be much nicer if you had your choir on your side, if you have people saying, "Wow, it's so great that you're pursuing your passions and you're doing so well at it." That's a win-win, but that's not always the case. And it's better to be on a path that you believe in and struggle. It's better for long-term happiness than be on a path that you don't believe in and check the success box.
That makes sense. And Tal, I want to come back to your story where we left off. You were in college and you switched majors. Talk about trajectory from that point forward and how things began to, spiral in a new direction.
Yeah. So again, I was very fortunate to um, to have teachers who helped me along. So when I after graduating from Harvard, I went to the other Cambridge across the Atlantic and studied education there. And then I went to Singapore for a few years and worked there. And in Singapore, I worked in organizational behavior in the world of business, psychology of business, and um, and then I went back to graduate school. I always knew that I wanted to go back to school. I went to graduate school, and there I had a mentor, Professor Philip Stone, who who was much more than my thesis advisor. Even much more than a mentor. In many ways, he was my, I see him as my intellectual father, and he helped me um, understand where I wanted to take the energy and my desire, which direction. He was one of the founders of the field of positive psychology, alongside Marty Seligman and Alan Langer, who was also my mentor, and Sonia Lyubomirsky and many others. And Philip Stone um, in many ways took me under his wings. I became his teaching assistant, his apprentice, and for 6 years I studied under his tutelage. And after 6 years and completing my PhD, he said to me the following. He said, I'm about to retire. He was in his 70s then, and would you like to take over my course? He was the first person at Harvard and one of the first people in the world to teach a course on positive psychology. So he said, would you like to take over my course? So I thought about it for about 3 milliseconds and said, yes, please. And started teaching positive psychology. And the course evolved from having, 8 students to over 800 students within a few years. Um, and there was and then I wrote books about the topic and continued teaching and taught in different places. And fast forward to today. Um, Today I have the Happiness Studies Academy, which is my primary focus. And the Happiness Studies Academy came, I talked about a few turning points earlier on, whether it's, winning the national championships, or that, being a sophomore at Harvard and realizing that I have to change my life. And another similar point came 5 years ago. I was actually on a flight then, and I was in the twilight zone, so to speak, between wakefulness and sleep, too uncomfortable to really fall asleep. And then a question came to mind, and the question was, how is it that there is a field of study for psychology, my field, and philosophy and history, and chiropractics and medicine, and biology and geography, and there is no field of study for happiness? Yeah, there is positive psychology, but that's just the psychology of happiness. What about what philosophers had to say about happiness? And what about what theologians had to say about the good life? And what about what economists or can teach us, or movies, or books, or literature can teach us? Why isn't there a field, or rather an interdisciplinary field of study that focuses on happiness? And I resolved then and there on that flight to help create a field of happiness studies. And a couple of years later, I co-founded the Happiness Studies Academy. A year after that, we launched our first program, a certificate in happiness studies. We're now in the midst of launching a master's degree in happiness studies. And this is what I'm focusing on. This is where I'm spending most of my time, creating programs, teaching. We have students from thousands of students from over 60 countries, all focused on increasing their own levels of happiness and helping others do the same.
And when you had that epiphany on the plane, were you teaching at Harvard at the time?
No, at that time I was on sabbatical. A couple of years later, I continued teaching at Columbia, and right now my primary and sole academic focus is on the Happiness Studies Academy, which essentially is becoming this year becoming a degree granting institution.
I want to talk more about your early teaching there when you took over from your mentor there. Did you say in the beginning there was 3 students in your class and it went all the way to 800?
Well, there were
8,
eight students.
sorry.
Please don't sell me short here. Two of them dropped out, leaving me with six, but that's still twice as much as three. Don't forget
Sorry about
that.
that.
And then, and then the class grew very, very quickly.
And what do you think it was about the class? What made it grow so quickly?
Yeah, it was actually one specific incident. So at the end of the class, so the second year it was already bigger, but still nowhere near the 800 that it was later. And at the end of each class, students evaluate the class, and there is, at Harvard it's called the Q guide. and and students evaluate the class on a scale of 1 to 5. How's the class, how's the professor, how's the reading, and blah blah. And the class had good evaluations, but many classes have good evaluations. And then at the end, there is an open question: is there anything else that you would like to add? And a large number of students wrote, "This course changed my life." And that was reported on in the Q Guide and later in the Harvard Crimson, the newspaper. And and that was at the beginning of the semester, the day after the class was packed.
What was that like for you to go, from teaching so little to being in front of so many students? Was it
Yeah.
intimidating for you? Was it exciting?
Yes and yes. Um, one of the biggest challenges that I faced and continue to face as a teacher is that I'm an introvert. I'm shy. I get very nervous standing in front of a large audience. And again, a large audience for me is anything above five. Um, so that first year was a real stretch. Um, and So it was very I was very nervous. As by the way, I still get nervous today, even though I've taught thousands and thousands of classes. I still get nervous today. The thing though is that over the years I've learned not to fight, not to battle, not to reject the anxiety, but to accept it and embrace it, to allow it to flow through me, and then it doesn't overstay its welcome. And then the excitement is also able to come out. So to your question, I was very happy that the class was having the impact that it did. I was very happy about the media coverage that it received after. At the same time, it also meant many sleepless nights, being worried and concerned about the upcoming um, interview, or about the upcoming class when I'm teaching something that I have not taught before in front of such a large audience. So it's like life: excitement, anxiety, and everything in between.
And at the time, this was the most popular course at Harvard. This is a big thing. And for you, how did that all come to an end? I mean, you had a really special thing going. How many years did you do it for, and how did it all tie up in the end and you move forward?
Yeah, so I taught at Harvard for 4 years, and then we decided, and you may you may think that there is a gridlock here, and there probably is. We decided to return to Israel, which is where we're both from, and and raise our children there, at least for the first few years, where we could be close to their grandparents, our parents, all the time knowing that we'll be back in the US. And when we returned, um, we came back to New York. I joined Columbia University and taught there. And by the way, there I already taught happiness studies rather than positive psychology.
I see. And as a general question, when it comes to happiness, how much of it is from genetics, what we're
Mm.
born with, versus, that we talked about some tactics earlier to catalyze getting the ball rolling and feeling happier. But how much of that is genetic, and how much room do we have to play around that pivot point?
Yeah, no, that's an important question, and it has also to do with our expectations. Having true rather than false expectations. Genetics matter, and genetics matter a great deal. On average, 50% of our happiness levels are determined by genes or very early experiences. In other words, things that we have zero control over. On average, 10% of our happiness levels are determined by external circumstances: where we live, where we're from, what we have, what we don't have. And 40% on average is determined by our choices. Now, I emphasized on average. Here's why. Let's take external circumstances, 10% on average. However, you can be sure that a person who lives in dire poverty, that affects those external circumstances, affect their happiness much more than 10%. Or you can be sure that a person who lives in a war zone, external circumstances matter much more than 10%. Or a woman who lives in a place where women are oppressed, second class citizens, you can be sure that external circumstances matter more than 10%. But on average, if basic needs are met, if basic freedoms are respected, it's only 10%. The same idea applies to the other elements. Sometimes people are born with genes that make them extremely susceptible to depression or anxiety. And then genes matter more than 50%. Or sometimes they're born with wonderful genes and Pollyannish genes where they see the positive in everything. And we know such people. Then, good for them. Genes affect more than 50%. Similarly with choices. And the question is, how can we increase that 40% average? How can we have more impact on our happiness levels based on our choices? And the answer here lies in becoming more mindful, aware of the choices that we have. Let me give you an example. So many of the choices that we have in life are what I've come to call rhetorical choices. Rhetorical choices, just like rhetorical questions, are one where the choice is obvious. If I say to my child, do you want daddy to be upset with you? It's a no-brainer. Yeah, it's a rhetorical question. Of course I don't. Similarly, there are rhetorical choices day in and day out in our life. For example, if I ask you, Jesse, do you want to take the good things in your life for granted, or do you want to appreciate the good things in your life, whether it's people or things?
Definitely want to appreciate and have gratitude.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a rhetorical choice. Who would tell you otherwise? And yet, and this is the important point, and yet, most people, most of the time, take the good things in their lives for granted. In other words, we have a rhetorical choice in front of us and we make the wrong choice. Why? Because we're not aware, we're not mindful of the fact that we have that choice at this particular moment. Similarly, do you want to sit down crouch or do you want to sit up straight when you know that affects your mood? Well, of course I want to sit up straight. And yet so many people, so much of the time, choose inadvertently to sit this way, affecting their well-being. We need to be mindful. We need to be reminded of the choices that we have, quite literally at every moment in our life. And when we're reminded of these rhetorical choices, that's when that 40% can become 50 or 70% in terms of affecting our happiness. And this is why the interventions within the field of happiness studies are so important. This is why, for example, we need to create a ritual, a daily ritual, where we express gratitude rather than take for granted. Even though we all know that it's important to take. But yes, doing what Oprah told us to do, keeping that gratitude journal before going to bed, writing it down. Or we have rituals around exercise, reminding us to exercise regularly, not just exercising when we feel like it, but doing it literally, religiously, as a ritual. Well, this is why we have rituals around learning, or reminders around appreciation. I often recommend managers, leaders in organizations to walk around with a bracelet. The bracelet as a reminder for doing something that they think is important for them to do as a manager and as a leader. For example, give compliments, appreciate others. Have a reminder. It's a rhetorical choice that people want to be appreciated, need to be appreciated, and that it feels good to appreciate. And yet, most people, most of the time, don't do it, or at least don't do it enough. So having reminders so that we raise our levels of awareness, so that we become more mindful of the kind of life that we want to live, of the kind of person that we want to be. This is important for having our choices affect our happiness in a more significant, deep way.
And as you talk about reminders, I've talked about this on the show, but I'll bring it up again. I have a little sticker here on my computer that says, "You are going to die." So for me, seeing that
Mm,
on a daily basis and thinking about death and having a healthy relationship with that is a big one for me to have gratitude over the present moment, to pull me back into the present and to live a happier life. At least it seems like that for me. So, talk about death. I know you got to go here, but I want to end on this. Talk about death and how we can use that to our advantage, and how much does our happiness revolve around having a healthy relationship with death?
yeah, the Israeli philosopher Shimon Azulai has inscribed on his tattooed on his hand um, the phrase in Latin that he's going to die, that it's all temporary, and he has it for the exact same reason, Jesse, that you just mentioned, to remind him of how precious life is, and just to take it to pop culture. I just finished watching um, 2 days ago The Good Place, which has really been one of my favorite all time um, TV series. And there, one of the big take homes is the importance of the finality of life, or for the fact that we don't live forever, and this is what gives our life meaning. Now we're all tempted to, or even want to, live forever, and there's a lot of science going into that, helping us live longer, and hopefully, well, for some, indefinitely. However, the fact that there is an end in sight makes um, provides us with meaning. There is research by Irvin Yalom, who is a psychiatrist emeritus at Stanford, where he interviewed people who were terminally ill. And these are people who have, 3 to 6 months to live. And the things that he heard from them very often were along the line of, for the first time in a very long time, I truly appreciate my life. For the first time in a very long time, I truly appreciate my wonderful and amazing, family, or myself, or a meal that I'm having. And they become very wise in their last few months um, because they realize that life is really short. Now, imagine if we could have that, and I guess you have that reminder of telling us, look, life is short. Make the most of it. Don't waste it, for example, on doing things that others are um, 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 think that are right for you. Do things that you think are right for you. Life is too short to conform. Life is too short, as Henry David Thoreau said. Life is too short to be in a hurry. So savor, enjoy, appreciate what you have. And one of the things that turns this wisdom key on, the wisdom key that leads to more appreciation, is knowing that it's going to end.
I think that's a good place to end it here. And Tal, you mentioned your teachings, and I know you have an online program people can check out. Tell people where they can connect with you after the show.
Yes, so the website is the happiness studies, one word, .academy. And there we have information about courses that we offer. And there are also links to uh, to uh, to live lectures that you can join and learn more about how you can help yourself and others become happier.
That's great. I'm going to link it up in the show notes. And before we part ways, any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
There is a double standard that exists in our society regarding bringing about psychological change or personal development in general. And the double standard is as such. People think that if they read a book on happiness or attend a lecture on happiness or hear some tips about happiness, that in and of itself will make them happier. Unfortunately, it won't. And the reason why I'm mentioning a double standard is because no one would imagine that reading a book about playing piano is enough to become a pianist, or reading a book or attending a lecture on your forehand will make you a good tennis player. You need to practice, you need to exercise, you need to apply what you learn in the book, the workshop, or the podcast. And this is what I'm urging our listeners and viewers to do. Experiment with things, try things out, apply them, learn about research, and engage in me search.
And I always talk about that, how we, translate all this amazing information that I chat with other guests on the show. And I always recommend people while they're inspired, right when they're done watching or listening to this, if there was something that called to you while you're inspired, go take action on it right away and try and form a habit around that over the next month because it's all about the small changes. And maybe in a month, come back and listen to this again or watch this again and pull something else from it. It's not going to happen overnight. Take that inspiration, that energy you have after being inspired by Tal here, and apply it to your life. Thank you, Tal.
Thank you very much, Jesse.